we go. So thank you again for joining us. I know everyone's time is precious and you're always doing a million things. So I'm excited that you decided to spend your lunch hour with me. I'm going to be talking about making a garden plan. And I do want to preface this with, I started this job 8 years ago with a brown thumb. It was not green. But I quickly learned that a lot of my failings early on were because I didn't have a plan. And as someone who loves checklists and a clear goal and a plan all the way to the end, I don't know why it took me so long to figure out that if I had just made a garden plan, life would have been a lot simpler. So we're going to walk through some steps today that hopefully help set you up for success and then some resources to help you along the way. So just some things to be thinking about. There we go. So we're going to, also moderating at the same time. So I'm going to, excuse me if I keep having to admit people here. So why are you planning or planting your garden in the first place? So a lot of folks are going to get into gardening because you're creating a space where you're controlling your ingredients, right? That's the real magic behind it, is that you know what ends up on your plate. So there's some real important like power and control of as far as like what you're putting in your body that comes from this experience, which just is really just priceless in and of itself. But you also get to enjoy the outdoors and sunshine. That sounds great until it's 98 degrees in Georgia with, 80% humidity, and then you still get to enjoy the outdoors and sunshine. But for the most part, it's, wonderful to be outside. And then you're feeding yourself, maybe family, friends, your community. So it's just a win-win all around. It can be as simple or complex as you want it to be. This doesn't have to be that you grow everything that you ever want to eat. And it doesn't have to be that you only grow carrots. You can pick that happy medium or start where you feel comfortable. So don't feel like you have to just barely dip your toe in the water if you're ready to like hit it and get it. Or if you have a lot of time that you feel you can devote to a garden, you can jump right in the deep end. I will be happy to help you. Or you can take it nice and slow. So find that spot that works for you. And you can start almost any time of year. Most folks kind of neglect the idea of a fall garden or getting some of those fall or winter crops in, but there are definitely some that are delicious and easy to try. Or if you're ready to get going now, we can talk about seed starting indoors. So there's always something or a way to get plugged in at the time of year when you're ready to take the plunge. And then planting a garden can take a lot of the guesswork out. So if you're wondering when to put the seeds in or where you're going to put everything, or did I figure that out quite right? Did I buy the right number of plants? I forgot what I was supposed to go to the store and get. This is going to help you make some of those decisions. So when you take out all that guesswork, it's going to leave you with a higher likelihood of success. And that's, of course, what we want, right? So you first need to think about what type of space that you have. We've got to site our garden, and that's going to really start to depend on what we can do there, how likely you are to actually work the garden, if they're getting what they need. So this is a step that can't be rushed. We really need to take the time and think through it. So we need 8 to 10 hours a day of sunlight. So most folks don't sit and watch a spot in their yard for 8 to 10 hours. But you can go out either a couple times a day and say, you know what, is that spot still in the sun where I thought it was? I didn't realize the shade from this tree was reaching over, or my garage, I didn't know that it shaded it out by the afternoon. So if you can't check on your space, there are little pretty inexpensive tools that you can just stick in the ground and it measures hours of sunlight. So there are tools that help you do this, but better safe than sorry. We want to know that your garden spot is getting the right amount of sunlight before you start tilling or putting these heavy raised beds or building all these trellises. Before you do that, we need to know it's in the right space. You need to have a water source. A garden, especially here in Georgia, is not going to do well if you don't have a water source. And I like to say no one wants to be carrying buckets and buckets and buckets of water. So please think through where your water source is located. Is it going to take 15 water hoses to reach your garden? If you're overhead irrigating or you have kind of think about like a sprinkler system, then do you really want to have all of that pressure loss or be messing with all those hoses all the time? Which is there a way to get it closer? Or if you are having to fill up cans, how far do you really want to carry that water? So thinking through your water source is also going to help you figure out the space. Then you want to think about access for not only you, but for the critters that might want access to this delicious garden that you're growing. So if you put your garden on the back 40, it's great that for whatever reason you have water back there. It's great that it gets 8 to 10 hours of sun, but are you really going to be scouting for diseases and insects and walking it every single day if it's inconvenient and out of the way? Probably not. But if you have to walk by it to go see the horses or walk past it to take your kids to, play on the play set, then you're more likely to see when you have tomato hornworms munching on tomatoes. You're more likely to see when you have that gigantic zucchini that got out of control and you lost the day before. So make sure that it's a place where you're going to have easy access because then you're more likely to take care of it. You also want to think about access from critters, like I talked about, anything from rabbits that love those fresh transplants and just those new growth that are so delicious that they just along the line, or deer, or could even be the dog. You want to make sure that you have access, but the critters that you don't want are out. So that perfect balance of access. And then is there good soil there? And that might not matter if you want to go with a raised bed situation, but if you're doing in-ground, which we'll talk about a little bit more, you don't want to pick a space that is going to be a headache from the beginning. If it's such heavy clay and it's so acidic that you're going to be working on bringing up the pH to make a garden happy over the next 10 years, like maybe we need to rethink the garden spot or the strategy for that spot. You could also have a history of weeds in that location. So there are a few weeds like sedges and things that if it has a history of you fighting yellow nut sedge right there or Bermuda grass that keeps getting in, maybe we need to think about containers or moving that because those are just going to be a pain in the neck all season. And then you're going to be aggravated with your garden. And it's supposed to be a fun, wonderful thing, not an aggravation to go fight every day. So then you have to decide what type of garden you're going to have. So one of the most common is going to be in-ground. So in-ground just means that you're planting those seeds or plants directly into the soil. This is definitely the most common because think of how easy it's right there, right? So the soil's primed and ready to go. But hold on, it might not be. So it does have the ability to have a really robust soil profile and some great organic matter, but what if it's not? You definitely want a soil test, and that's going to tell you the nutrient profile that's there, as well as the pH, which we have naturally acidic soils here in Georgia. And most of our garden vegetables prefer more of a neutral soil. So it does take some effort and time and money in order to get a lot of these soils to a place where they can actually produce a garden that's you're not going to be just throwing money at throughout the season. So you want to know that you've treated your soil or prepared it properly to be an in-ground garden. It's not normally just a till and go kind of a thing. So it can be the cheapest way to get started. You're not having to pay for materials to build beds or find soil because it's already here for you. So that's wonderful. It's great for plants that are really deep rooted because they can go as deep as they need to, right? You don't have to worry about your raised bed being so deep or so tall. It's also great for those large spreading plants. We have a slight argument going on in my house about if squash is better off in containers or in ground. I like them in ground better because you have that nice spread. And I don't want one squash plant taking up one of my raised beds. That's premium space. So I'd rather them be in ground. Um, they're also, you normally don't want to raise something up off the ground if it's already going to be extremely tall. So your corn, I have seen corn in raised beds, but I don't know how they pick it. I'm 5'5". I'm not reaching corn that's already tall, and then you put it in a raised bed. So things like corn, squash, pumpkins, although we'll talk about another place for pumpkins. Certain tomatoes are best to go in ground. Your green beans, field peas, onions, and okra is another really tall one. I do say green beans and think about any of your trellising or climbing beans because we use cattle panels, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the garden. And I don't want to have to move those panels all the time from different raised bed to raised bed. I have them set in a line in my garden and then I move them every 2 years. So all of these do really well if you're looking at an in-ground garden. Your other option, which I've talked about a little bit, are containers. And container plantings can look like anything. It's also called a raised bed or raised garden. You can build it from metal, wood, cattle feed tubs, hanging baskets. Anything that's going to hold soil and some moisture can be a raised garden bed. But you want to make sure that it's going to be safe to hold food. And what I mean is when you're using wood, you want to either use cedar or something that's untreated because those treatment chemicals can and will leach into the soil and it's not safe for human consumption. So you want to ensure that although you can get really creative with what these containers are made from, you want to ensure that it's going to be safe for you. So most folks are going to use what they have readily available to them. So that can make some of these look really interesting. We have cattle feed tubs at my house. We have some untreated wood beds that we built. And then I think we did have some planters that used to have ornamental flowers in them. And I said, nope, that's officially one of my vegetable planters now. So sky's the limit with what you choose. You do want to make sure that they have proper drainage. So for like cattle feed tubs, that means you go an inch or two up on the sides and drill some holes. So not on the very bottom, because you do want it to retain some moisture. You don't want it just flooding right back out. For something like these raised beds, normally they're going to be open on the bottom. They might have weed fabric or something, but it can drain down to native soil or soil that's not been brought in. So something that's going to allow drainage to go through. Now that's a benefit and can be tough at times, depending on the type of soil you built in. So knowing that it's not going to hold moisture like it does if you're doing in ground. So some of your things that want to be, that are really thirsty or we're going through a drought, these containers are well drained. So you're going to be watering a lot more instead of that soil that's naturally holding everything in like an in-ground would. So some plants to consider if you do have containers are things like carrots. Why that is because carrots are a root vegetable. The easier it is for them to grow down and have plenty of this fresh, lovely soil to push out and grow, they're going to be a lot happier there. You can grow some really like funky sized and shaped carrots in ground. It's completely possible and they taste the same. But if you're wanting that nice straight carrot that we think about at the grocery store, containers tend to be a better option, not always, but our rocks and clay can make carrots tough in ground. So any of your root vegetables, they tend to like these containers, but you are going to need to give them plenty of room to grow down. So think about something that's really deep. Your flowers are always a great one. That's for both enjoyment and if you're using any of your like culinary flowers, those do really well in containers. Your peppers do well in containers. The other reason why I like peppers in containers is because I can spread them out a little easier. So if we don't want peppers crossing or cross-pollinating each other, if I want my banana peppers not to be crazy spicy, then I need to make sure my cayenne peppers are far enough away. So if they do cross, last year I knew it. I knew I was doing it. We did it anyway. We had some very spicy banana peppers because they were too close to our cayenne. So if you're wanting to ensure that some things like peppers or beans or peas aren't crossing with each other and you're wanting them to stay true to the cultivar that you want, then there are certain things that need enough space between each other so that they're not going to cross. So if you put peppers in containers, a lot of times it's easier to get more space between them. They also don't like wet feet. And what that means is they don't want water just sitting on their roots all the time. And having the drainage of a container helps peppers stay really happy. Not to say that these things can't be grown in ground because they absolutely can. This is just, they're kind of like a happy go-to. Your herbs are great in containers. One, because a lot of them like to spread like crazy. If they're happy, they're going to start to take over things, and containers help keep them contained. Another thing is they're right there to walk out, grab a handful of whatever you need for tonight's dish and get back to the house. So you can have containers that are a little bit easier to access for things like herbs that you're going to be using consistently. And then radishes and beets are, again, those root vegetables that are happy with that loose soil that you can provide in a raised bed. Then we have vertical gardening, and this has kind of taken on some new meaning in the past couple of years. So when I say vertical gardening, I'm thinking of when your space is limited. You're like, I would love to spread this out from here to there, but I have this yard to work with. And that's just the reality that most of us have. So one of the best options is to start thinking about going up. So vertical gardening, just in this talk, is going to mean using trellising, ladder systems, anything to help get plants to go up instead of taking space along the ground that we would use for other plantings. So plants that we can very easily take up and that love to climb, talking about cucumbers, which is pictured here. They love to climb. Now, if you want to keep them lower to the ground, that's completely okay. But if you give them a trellis, they are happy to go up, up, up. Certain beans, there are such a thing as bush beans, so they are not going to climb. But some of your other beans will, and they're great to grow up a trellis. You can make these from anything from like your wood lattice to cattle panels, build trellises with whatever kind of wood you have. I've seen bamboo poles used to make different archways, a little bit of everything. So as long as they have something to grow onto that gives them structure, you can take these things vertical. Certain tomatoes actually really love to grow vertically, so you don't always have to take up in-ground space with tomatoes. The cherry tomatoes especially love to climb, and they get crazy wild. So taking them up will help a lot of things too. And then certain squashes, believe it or not, actually enjoy climbing. Things like certain types of pumpkins, you can get them to climb just like they love to spread and grow along the ground. They do love to climb. But keep in mind that some of the squashes get really heavy. So squashes, melons, ensure if you have one of the larger cultivars, you have an option, you have a game plan in place of how to support them with the weight. Because if they do get too heavy without you putting, basically people, it looks like hammocks. They like support the fruit and then kind of raise it up so it's not tugging on the vine the whole time. So if it needs a little extra helping hand, you're there to help it out. So if you want to baby them that much, or if you say, well, then that cultivar is not for me, just need to be thinking about that. And then, of course, everyone's favorite is having a little bit of everything, right? So just figuring out the space that you have and then matching that with the plants that grow there best. And then you can prioritize because no one has room for everything. Um, and if you are like, you know what, carrots are my absolute favorite, or I love squash, but I only have vertical space, that's okay. Just knowing that that might not be their preferred method is all right if we then use cultivar or the type of squash to then choose something that's better for that intended space. So there are plenty of cultivars that are made to be larger or smaller for containers, or they love to climb for vertical, or these, are huge and maybe that's for in-ground. So just be willing to try something new. It might be a different color than you were intending. It might be a purple carrot instead of that orange that you were accustomed to. It might not have a name that just sounds fancy or great, but it might be the best choice for the space that you have. So just be adventurous, be willing to try something new if the plant you're wanting isn't in the traditional right space for what it might enjoy. You need to have your materials on hand or at least be thinking them through before you have a garden so that you're not behind the eight ball. You want to make sure that you have this figured out. So most everyone's going to be already thinking about their gardening tools. You're thinking about a trowel, a hand rake, your gloves, you're ready to go. But also think about your trellising materials, have those ahead of time. No one wants to be trying to put a trellis together after your little bean tendrils are looking for something to hold on to. Because if you're not ready, they are, and they're going to start attaching to everything. Or, now you're trying to get your squash up off the ground and connecting it to a trellis. So have those trellis materials ready to go and already made. You're going to need a drill potentially to create drainage in those containers. If you have a lot of trellising that needs some structure, then a tapener tool is a type of tool that it's a little piece of tape and a staple, and it connects and goes around a plant. So we use it to connect tomatoes to our trellis. We help it with squash, and beans normally don't need any help. But if you need to redirect them or say stay here, a tapener tool is one of my absolute favorite gardening tools. You're going to want just boo-poodles of buckets because they're always helpful for everything, from weeding to collecting all these delicious squash and zucchini and peas. So you're going to need all the miscellaneous things that come with gardening, and you'll figure out some of your favorites along the way. You're also going to know figure out what you need for watering accessories. So I said watering kind of makes or breaks the garden. So how are you going to water? You might need drip tape or decide soaker hoses. Are you really putting in the irrigation and you're connecting everything with PVC out the bat? Probably not. But soaker hoses and drip tape are a really great starter. Soaker hoses are probably the most beginner friendly because most of them will have a hose connection straight from the spigot. You don't have to worry about getting a lot of adapters. So be thinking about how you're going to get water to all these new baby plants that you're in charge of. Then weed control. So this is absolutely the most time-consuming part of having a garden. So just money wasting, time wasting. This is going to be one of those things that you're fussing and griping about in that 90-degree weather. So come up with a plan now and give yourself a leg up. Think about mulch. Mulch, you're going to need 2 to 4 inches in order to actually combat weeds. Most people are going to put out composted mulch or pine bark and think I put enough. You probably didn't. One, and two, you want to make sure it's composted properly. Otherwise, you're tying up nutrients in your garden, so it's going to work against you. There's weed fabric that you can put down. That has been just a time saver in my garden. There are flame torches, which is very cathartic. Once you've pulled weeds for hours and hours, there's nothing better than just like going after them with a flame torch and getting some revenge. You also have living mulch. That just means planting something like a clover or a low growing plant in between your rows. So that helps keep weed pressure down. If you have something that you've planted and want to grow there, it's less likely to have weeds poking and rearing their ugly heads. And then there's always a chemical option. I know this group might not be into that, but there are chemical options. So if you've exhausted everything else and you need help with a chemical recommendation, we can help with that as well. Think about why you're gardening in the first place. And I know that's kind of seems like a crazy question, but it does change how we plan out the type of plant we're choosing and how many we're putting in. So if you're wanting something for fresh eating, teas and herbs, or canning and preserving, we're kind of pick your own path, and it's going to change things a little bit. So talking about fresh eating first, because this is really what everyone pictures, right? That BLT, that tomato sandwich, that cucumber salad, like that's what we want. But that means that you don't want all of your cucumbers at once, most likely. You don't want one cucumber salad at the end of the season. You want several throughout. You want to be able to share with your family and friends. So you want something continuously producing. So that's really key here. You want edible portions available. You don't want like one cucumber and then you're hosting, a family get together and you're like, well, we're all sharing this one. So we need to really plan this out. So often if it's not planned, it can kind of feel like feast or famine. You're waiting and waiting, and then all of a sudden you have more cucumbers than you know what to do with. So just be patient. One of the things we want to aim for is indeterminate types. And what that means, and you'll see this when you start shopping for your different cultivars, is indeterminate means that they're going to bear fruit throughout the season. When we start talking about determinate, we determined the ending date for these plants, and they tend to put on fruit all at the same time. So for fresh eating, indeterminate is the name of the game. Then we want to have succession plantings. And all that means is we don't want to plant an entire row of cucumbers on the same day. You would much rather plant, I normally do it in thirds. So plant a third of your cucumbers and then maybe 2-3 weeks, depending on how much you're doing, spread out and then plant another third and then spread it and do another third a little while later. So you still want to fall within that planting window, and we'll talk about that. But this means that your plants are going to be maturing at different times, and those later maturing, they'll be still fruiting and providing you with fresh produce when the first ones are finished out with their life cycle and ready to be replaced. So succession planting will help you stay in fresh produce. And then some cultivars are just better than others for fresh eating. And most good seed and plant companies, they're going to help you out with that. I can help you with that as well. So some are just better. It could be sugar content. It could be that they tend to not do as well in in-ground settings. So some cultivars you just want to stay away from, that they're not as good for those fresh eating. Then if you're wanting teas and herbs, this is definitely a growing area. It's a wonderful way to add a personal touch. This can be 1 or 2 kitchen herbs that you know and love, or you could have a whole tea garden. So most of these plants do well in containers. A lot of these, I really do recommend containers for them. And then they can be harvested several times. as needed. So that's even better, right? If we're using these for fresh things or even drying, it's going to be throughout the season. Believe it or not, we can grow tea here in Georgia. So there is an actual tea plant and we can grow that. It does need a little extra TLC, but there are some other plants that grow really well here in Georgia that can make tea, such as mint, chamomile, lemon balm, Tulsi basil, also known as holy basil, is a really great tea plant. And it's really wonderful because you can let your creativity go and make the perfect tea blend for you and see which of these plants you enjoy growing, which ones you enjoy the flavor. So it's kind of an adventurous way to go about creating your own tea. So if you've not thought about that, that could be a garden direction for you. And then herbs are definitely an easy one. It's really nice to say, I need a little cilantro with this meal. I want to sprinkle it on my tacos, or I wanted mint because I'm making this wonderful lemonade, and I think it'd be great with a hint of mint. Whatever it might be, having one container is as simple as it has to be with these plants. It doesn't have to be a 20-foot long container either. I'm talking about something small on the porch or patio or one of those cattle feed tubs. Some of these, although they love containers, some of these grow really quickly. So even if you're thinking that you're only going to pick them when you want them, a lot of them are going to require more maintenance than that. Especially, I'm thinking about you, cilantro. One of my favorites, it has a tendency to bolt, meaning it goes all the way to flower and seed really quickly. If you keep it pruned, it won't do that as much. It still will, but not as much. So even if you're not using it or have a plan for it, you do need to be harvesting a lot of these frequently to keep them actively growing. Then if you're planning to can or preserve, then this is going to change the game a little bit. So you don't want to be holding on to one tomato today, then another tomato tomorrow, and another tomato 4 days from now in hopes that you get enough to make yourself some salsa to can. That's not realistic. So you want to ensure that we're choosing determinate types, or we have a way to hold on to them, whether that's freezing or drying, ways to work in those smaller batches. So I highly recommend not to try to just preserve everything your first or even second year. Start with one thing that you want to learn or try in bulk, and then start to locally source the rest if you're buying in bulk. A lot of your local farmers are a wonderful resource at this, and they've been doing it for a long time. So don't try to figure out everything the first or second year. Use them as a backup, and then you can slowly become more independent. There are certain things that are garden workhorses that are a really great place to start for your canning or preserving. I'm thinking about okra. Okra is definitely a workhorse here in Georgia. You plant it and it will grow, and you're going to have okra for you, your neighbors, your canning and preserving, and even leave okra for people you don't want. You're going to have plenty of okra. Corn can be a really great one because even if you have a small space, you're going to have several plants that are going to have several ears, and you can work on putting that into a salsa or cream corn. There are ways to be able to put that up, and it's going to come in approximately the same time. And then your peas and beans are also ones that are really easy to get going and see how this all works. Like I mentioned, thinking of ways to just process smaller quantities at first to kind of dip your toe in the pool instead of everything coming in at once. It is tough to try to process okra and corn and beans and peas and squash and zucchini and doing it all at the same time. There's just not enough time in the day because while you're processing, it still needs help in the garden to do what it's doing. So make sure you have a plan for when it's coming in and what you're going to do when it does, because they're going to quickly take over your kitchen. And then we have what I call garden math. It's like chicken math, but now there are hungry people involved. So how much of this one vegetable do you really need to plant in the garden in order to meet your needs? And this is something that I kind of struggled with at first. It's like, I have this garden space. I did the soil test. I think I know I want peppers and I know I want peas, but how many rows do I need to do of each? And I'm afraid I'm going to have overkill of this one and not enough of that one. And how do I even figure this out to set myself up for success? So we're going to walk through an example. We're going to take bell peppers. So you want to figure out how much the average person is consuming of bell peppers a year if you're wanting to truly start to calculate your garden math. It's reported to be about 11.4 pounds of peppers per person in the US per year. So this is going to be about 36 large peppers. Now, if you eat stuffed bell peppers once a week in the summer, then likely your percentage of bell peppers, your number of bell peppers that you need is going to go up. So be thinking about that. This is just an average. Then once you have an average, you want to go to how many bell peppers or how much is a single plant going to produce. And it will tell you, depending on cultivar, what you choose. So again, it comes into your research. But you think about the average bell pepper plant is going to have about 3 to 4 pounds of peppers. So you'd need about 4 plants to meet fresh eating needs. This is for one person. So if you are feeding the whole family, if you know for a fact that each bell pepper is not going to be perfect, you're going to lose some, you need to gift some to your mom. She'll never forgive you if you leave her out. Your neighbor's been just salivating over your garden. You need to provide them some too. If you're wanting to preserve some, if you have any other things that you need to account for, then it's going to change that number. Normally, it means that we're going to be making it bigger. But this at least gives you a starting point for what you would need in the garden. So you can do that with all of the things that you're planting, but you want to be realistic. So you need to factor in buffers. Do you have favorites in your household? Are you eating more than that average person? We eat stir fry in the summer a whole lot. So any of our peppers or squash, zucchini, carrot, like that's all going in stir fry. We absolutely love making roasts. So I'm using all kinds of peppers in that. So we go through a lot of peppers. I could not easily go through that and say that'll suffice for my family. That's not realistic. But it still is a good starting point. If you are asking, am I average or not? I don't know. Sure, be average this year, right? And then adjust next year. So you want to keep track. So keep track of the quantity that you put in and how much produce that you create, that you actually take in. So then you know what? We ran out of peppers in November and I had to wait until my summer garden again to have more. Then we know you produced 44 pounds of peppers and it wasn't enough for 4 of you. Then we need to multiply that this coming year. And one of the really helpful tools is this UGA vegetable planting chart. I just live by this chart when I'm drawing out my garden plans and figuring out my plant orders. It has everything. This is just one page of it. So everything, your vegetables are in alphabetical order. It gives you your planting dates so you can figure out those succession plantings and still stay within your planting dates. It gives you how many seeds per 100 feet. So if you're like, you know what, this row is going to be purple whole peas, which is one of my absolute garden favorites. This is going to tell you how many seeds per that 100-foot row that you would need to get. So now you know how many seeds you need to buy when you go to the store. But it also gives you your spacing, your rows per plant. So if you know now that you need 10 bell pepper plants, then you're able to go in and see your spacing per plant. And now you're asking, this now isn't going to fit in my in-ground garden. I multiplied everything out, so now I need to find a different place. Maybe they have to go in containers. So this is where the math kicks in, where you can truly start to put your garden plan on paper, which I highly recommend. Put it on paper, draw it out, do the math, and make sure that things are going to fit. So some other things to consider as you plan is your ability to rotate vegetable classifications. You don't want to plant tomatoes the same place this year as you do next year. They can be in the same in-ground garden, but they don't need to be in the same row. So things like that are really important. We normally don't put brassicas back to back. So if you're planting something in the brassica family, for your summer garden, you don't want to plant a brassica there in the fall. So starting to think about, like, if I took over my entire garden with peppers, then I really don't need to put peppers there next year. So I limited my ability to rotate through. So then I need to move them to half of the garden so they can be in the other half next year. So this just adds in one more thing to think about. Can you access these things? It talks about spacing in that previous slide, and I followed the spacing. I need a little bit more room. I always have little hands that are helping me, and there's not enough space for all of us to be there crowded around a squash plant. So make sure that everyone that's going to be helping you, or maybe there's someone that has some accessibility needs and has maybe limited mobility, those things need to be considered, whether it's the height of the garden bed, the raised bed, or it's the fact that you don't put things all the way at the back of the in-ground of things they're going to be using or at the front. All of that's going to factor in. And then who is actually harvesting? So my kids all have their favorites as far as what they like to harvest. And so I like to ensure that, one, I'm not going to fuss at them or them getting in trouble because they're trampling one thing while trying to get to their favorite. But I'm not going to put my cherry tomatoes up on a huge lattice work because that's one of their favorites to pick. Kids love cherry tomatoes. I'm just saying, it's one of the best for them to pick because they're prolific. They're always putting out tomatoes and they're like perfect little kid size. So I'm not going to put that on a 6-foot trellis because then they can't reach it. So maybe I need to lower the trellis for them. So thinking about all of those things. Now you're going to put it into action. You need to decide if you're going with seeds or transplants. Seeds are going to be your often most cost-effective route. You can get these just about anywhere, any storefront, online and in person. There are plenty of catalogs to choose from. They are going to have your tried and trues, absolutely, but it also gives you an ability to try something new that maybe the store down the road doesn't carry. You know, I've really been wanting to try this one or this squash that was going to go up a trellis, and I can't find that at my local store. So seeds can be a great option, especially since they're so cost effective. Now, okra, corn, squash, zucchini, carrots, peas, beans. Please, please, please go the seed route. A lot of these are a waste of time, money, and effort to do transplants. So I highly recommend going seeds for all of these plants. Now, transplants just means someone else grew out these seeds and now they're little baby plants. They are a hardy option. They're definitely great for beginners, gives you kind of a jump start. You do want to ensure that they're disease-free and they're vibrant and they look really good. You don't want to start with a transplant that's already struggling, then your garden's going to be struggling. It doesn't magically get better once you move it to your garden. You want to make sure that they're hardened off properly. And what that means is they didn't go right from a greenhouse to outside. That's really stressful. They went from this perfect environment to all of a sudden wind and birds flying by and different temperatures at night. So anyone who is producing transplants will tell you that they do that gradually over time. They move them outdoors, and that's called hardening them off. So want to ensure that that was done properly. You can source these from storefronts, local farmers, find them just about anywhere as well. You want to look for tomatoes are great ones, peppers, eggplant, and herbs. Some publications will tell you herbs are great from seed, and you absolutely can do any of these from seed. But I recommend starting with a transplant. It's just easy and ready to go. So if you've now decided if you're going seed or transplant, now you've got seeds, like where necessarily are you going for them? So box store, absolutely. I know some people worry that that means that they've been there forever. They do refresh those each year. So seed packets that are not within date are pulled and you get a new batch every year. So that's not something to worry about. Online seed companies definitely have done tons of different products. But then there's also a couple others I wanted to throw out. You can check out seed libraries or seed swaps. So those are options to get seeds from other farmers or producers, gardeners, and often they're willing to share their seeds. Sometimes you've got to bring your own in order to be involved in the swap, but seed libraries are normally open to anyone. So if you want to try something out, that's a normally you don't have to pay. Sometimes they might ask for a donation, but that's a really cost-effective way to try something out that has normally worked locally because that's where the seeds came from. And then farmers markets can also be another great location if you've not thought about that before to source both plant and seed material. You can ask questions about that cultivar. You can ensure your timing is correct. And I say that because every year folks show up to our farmers market and they say, why aren't the tomato plants here yet? They're at fill in the blank XYZ big box store. And it's because big box store wanted to get a jump and be ready, and they know that you're ready to buy them, so they're ready to sell them. But our local farmers know those aren't ready to go in the ground yet. So that's why they're not bringing them to sell, because they don't want you to have a bad experience. They want you to be a return customer. So normally, like big asterisks there, normally our farmers markets are going to be selling these transplants when they're actually ready to go home with you. So when you're putting this into action and you're thinking about your timing, and I know we had our groundhog this week. So if you're too early putting things in, you're going to risk cold damage, lost plantings, stunted germination, a bunch of just really miserable things that make you feel like your garden wasn't as successful as you'd like it to be. So again, just because you see them in the store does not mean they are good to go and ready to be outside. Now, if it's a deal you just can't turn down, I've become that way too. I understand you might need to take them home and baby them inside, but they're not ready to go in the garden yet. So make sure you're still following that planting date. If you're too late, it might be okay and it might not. Often means others are just enjoying their gardens before you are, and that's okay. Just don't get discouraged about it. No one's timing is perfect all the time. Just put it on the calendar and make sure that we're on it for next gardening season, and you just might not be able to enjoy it for as long. So we have several different resources available through UGA Extension. The vegetable planting chart is what I showed a page of before. It's just such a great one. I have one laminated and with me as I'm planning things out, and even in the garden to check my seeding depth, because it just has everything on there. And it's just in one convenient place. So absolutely have to have, in my opinion. And then the UGA garden calendar is a must have for anyone who loves lists and to-do lists and check marks like I do. So it's a month by month checklist of what you should be doing in your Georgia garden. Everything from planning to this month you should be thinking about this. This month is for cover crops. This month you should be checking on the tiller and doing your maintenance. It just has everything there. So it's a great checklist to kind of have on the fridge or have with you with your garden calendar and know what's going on. And then invest in, and I say invest kind of loosely, like you can get a cheap calendar, but get a garden calendar for you. Write down on there when you planted in the garden. Write down then when you should be fertilizing or when you did fertilize. Like, I don't remember, was that Tuesday or did I do that 2 weeks ago? Because life gets crazy and there's so much going on when you have the garden in front of you. So if you're writing it on your garden calendar in your harvest times, then you have a better handle on what's going on all around you. And I've got to say, there's also something exciting about when you put your planting date on the calendar and I put the peas in here, being able to flip forward and have your harvest date, you're like, this is when I can look forward to peas, is also really, really wonderful. UGA Extension has numerous publications on specific garden plants and topics. So if you need an extra hand on what it means to grow broccoli or bell peppers or carrots or tomatoes or anything in between, there is likely a specific publication on that we're going to walk you through everything from cultivar choice to fertilizing rates, how to plant, what diseases they're susceptible for. So if you know what you're putting in for your garden, go ahead and pull those specific publications. They're all available online, or I'm happy to help you locate those. So if you have all those resources readily in your hands, then you're more likely to put them into action. And I hope that helps you feel like you're ready to start making your garden plan. There's always a million things to think about. So if you have any more questions or ever need help making your garden plan or bringing it to life, that's exactly what I'm here for. So feel free to reach out anytime.